Interesting. I'm not there. Let me just work out where I've gone to. Oh, this has already stopped working. Oh, we had this last time, didn't we? That it just doesn't seem to like putting me on. I'm going to remove iOS camera. Add it on again. Okay. And then it's not finding it. Okay, folks, hold with it. There we go. Right. Okay. Oh, and I need to take the mic off that one. Well, that was a fun start. I've got to love the technology. I literally check it before I go live. I put it onto the trailer and it's all working. I put it onto a trailer and it stops working. I'm not quite sure what the problem is. It worked fine until a couple of weeks ago. And at that point, I'd reshuffled all my USB. So I wonder if the cable's not as good or something. But anyway, welcome, folks. Good to have you here. Thanks to Digger, Timber and Norm, my moderators who are in chat and will keep you all in order if you get naughty. And, well, welcome to everybody else who's turned up. Shergle's just snuck in, I see. And Tim, hi Tim, not off in the real world doing real big railways. And then, time's out. Yes, probably Monique. So, congratulations, Monique. She's got a short-term contract. That's great. And welcome to Ravenson Express. It's another live stream. I don't know. I know as you get older, every minute is a smaller percentage of your life than every preceding minute. But the minutes are flying past, as are the months. I can't believe it's November and we're partway through it. Just shock horror that time is passing. And, I don't know about you guys, but I've actually finally got some modelling done in my time. So we're going to be talking about this week. And I actually even have a video with modelling on it to show you. Whew, that's a real plus. Welcome. Let's have a look who's else. Have I missed anyone in chat? If I do ever miss you, apologies. It's not deliberate. And Tim's off to see his full-size railways next weekend. Track relay. So I wanted to show off my first ever multicolour prints. Look at these. Now these are actually all the test ones. This was the first one I did, and can you see that? I gotta love this very tacky person. It's not great, and the reason it's not great, yep, you can see that it's different layers. You can see the actual dent there. It had a few holes. It didn't really feel well, and that was printed that way up. So then I printed this one with it face down, but with the textured sheet that I had on, because I thought, oh, and I'd had the textured one on the back of the other one, and it looks fine on the back. You don't really notice it, but on this one it's supposed to be a Sabat card, in case you're wondering, and I don't know, it just looked wrong. So then I printed it in, here we go, nope, that way. Here I printed it face down, as the last one was, on a smooth sheet, and this is the winner, except you can probably just see a ring of black around the edge, and that was a mistake that I then had to go and fix, because this is the other Sabat card, and this is the browns, and this is a reject because it's got white on the side and it's supposed to have black in the middle, and I'd done undo a couple too many times. And if I just show you the backs, they've got backs. So if you've played Outlaws at all, you will have seen these Sabat cards, and they're just off Maker World. They're really good. You just bring them in, and then I had to tweak all the colours to get them to work. But these are so cool. I'm really happy. And it literally is, you put it on the printer, you have your sort of object, let's call it an object, it's an STL, and you can colour it. And these came in ready coloured for a bamboo from Maker World, but they just screwed up when I went from A1, which was what it came in as, to P1S. And as a result, I was like, this isn't great. So I ended up doing a bit of tweaking myself, but really pleased. And the next one of these printed even better. So really, really pleased. I've got a set that will come off in the middle of the live stream. I'll put a set on overnight, and then I'll have my 3 lots of 1 to 6 plus you have to throw, and it can be any of the values, and I've just totally forgotten what that card's called, plus my Psylop. And these are the Psylops. So very exciting. It's a game you play within a game. and I'm recreating it for my droids to play. So there we go. Right. Yellow and white is always harder to see. Yeah, these are a sand deck, and this is the brown. This is the blood deck. Yeah, that's the blood deck. So, but these are the colours they are in the game, so that's why I've done them. So, Ravison Express, 3D printed cards, isn't that a little bit expensive? Why not print and cut them the usual way? Because I wanted to play on my new printer with multicolours. I guess they are expensive, but by the time I've printed the dice, the shift tokens, the box, the tax chips, credits, and actually some credits which are Republic for buy-in, and by the time I've done all of that, I feel like having just the 3D printer out for these wasn't the worst thing that I spent the money on. It's an interesting thing about I really like the feel of these. They're quite solid. They're nice. You can't buy Sabac cards, and I can't print this thickness of card at home. So I would have ended up having to take it to a print shop. At which point I'm like, if I'm going to go to a print shop, why don't I just play with my multicoloured prints at home? So I'm very excited to do multicoloured prints. And actually, yellow, I did buy the yellow and brown for this, but the black and white I'd have had anyway. So it's only 2 extra colours. And, you know, I print so much stuff that the filament would just get used. I've got, with the yellow, the desire to print some maybe cargo crates or stuff like that in it. Or even for my Junk Room City that's coming up, I might do all the numbering in sort of browns and yellows and stuff like that for the floors. Might do some panels. I'm going to do some signs at some point in bright colours, so I may have to buy some fluorescent colours or something. Guys, you miss Ravison, print them on paper and glue them to cardboard. Yes, but I can 3D print these on my brand new printer that does multicolour prints. This is really cool. I wanted something to try a multicolour print for. This was a great test case. I will probably never even use these, but in earnest to play a game, because I have nobody who's going to play them with me. But I'm, you know, and I can go play it in the game if I want to play it and cheat. Well, you know, I can't stick these up my hand. Though I have got all these are all spare Silops from the test prints. So it's just for the fun of it. That's why I did it, not because I want some back cards and I'm going to go out of my way to make them. So anyway, there we go. Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it. I also bought a multicoloured filament, which has 2 colours in it for the box. And I can't say I was particularly keen on that, but there we go. Hi, Dan's model railroading journey that has just come into chat. So welcome. In other news, I finished my Kickstarter. It's actually still going up because late pledges are open. If you haven't backed, you know the drill by now. It didn't get to its last stretch goal, but I gave that anyway because it's just part and parcel of everything else. Yeah. So, yeah. Sorry, I was just reading Ravenson's. Yes, I understand your motivation, but when you need them in a large amount, it's a little bit hard to print them all, and not everybody has a multicolour printer. That's very true. You can actually do. I know one guy who does the most amazing prints. Fabian, isn't it, Shergel? On it is Fabian and not you. On Second Dynasty ships, and he does all of his multicolour by hand. He literally tilts them and twists them and puts them on supports, and does warning stripes in everything and does everything. Yeah, it's Fabian. And he does amazing work with multicolour parts, and he just does it by hand. He just puts in a G-code stop, and when the machine stops, he changes over the filament, which is actually, these are quite wasteful of filament. I look to do a column, one of my the LED columns, I looked to do it in multicolour, and it was going to use half a roll of filament just to do one because of all the colour change, purging and priming every time it goes up. And I could have got those down, but yeah. So multicolour, I am not going to do a huge amount of it because of all the purge prime wastage, but I really fancied having a go, and these have come out so well, and I'm really pleased. And sometimes you just do things for the fun of it. And yeah, I understand that everyone's got a multicolour printer. Most of my prints are still going to be one colour. But I'm actually printing the Trailblazer at the moment from Outlaws, from Tellus War Games. It was his Patreon last month. I'm busy printing that in matte grey. So that's going on the other one. But next on this is actually silver for the shift tokens. For those that haven't played it, that's irrelevant. But they're like silver and they stand on end and they're going to be really cool. Hi Bill, Willy Waste, who has just arrived. So I have got a little bit of progress on Junk Room City that I was going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about big FDM prints. Now, not all of you will have FDM printers because a lot of you will have resin printers, but I have always had both. I got my first resin printer, and within a few months really, I bought an FDM printer to be able to do construction items. So when I was building Port de Noort Mark 1, I could use it to create bespoke shapes and bolting and brackets and all sorts of stuff. And I used it more for construction type stuff rather than finished modelling. And then I started to do terrain and bigger pieces, and I was struggling with resin warping a lot. So I tried to do a building in resin and it warped. I tried to do a stone wall in resin and it warped over 6 months quite badly. And I've actually moved to doing mostly FDM now, and very excited by the increased sort of like, because FDM is getting faster, you can do smaller layers. So my layers are 0.08, whereas a lot of people print their resin at 0.05. So I'm not actually that far out now on a lot of people's resin printing. It's still twice, you know, for me 3 times, because I normally do it at 0.025. It's still 3 times, so it's not as refined for the layers, 3 times the size. But I'm really appreciating how good the FDM looks, especially in a matte filament. You almost don't need to you almost don't need to paint. I mean, on this one, I know this is the build plate side, but it's smooth and perfect. It just looks so good. You almost don't need to paint. Ravenson says multicolour resin printers would be a nice thing, but it's technically impossible. There are resin multicolour. They're the really, really, really Miyake. They're resin, and they're really expensive, and they are multicolour. So you can do it. Don't ask me how the ink works with it, but they do work. You would have to sell your house probably to buy it, but there we go. Mimaki, that was it. Thanks, Shergel. Monique says FDM is great for larger prints like buildings, walls and terrain. Anything you want to be dimensionally stable over time, I tend to now put into, into FDM. So Mimaki makes the multicolour ones, but there are others. I think a lot of the others are either gypsum or nylon. Mimaki is resin. So I think is it Intersys? Someone like that does the other ones. Anyway, Tim says he's got 0.01 millimetres on his resin printer this evening, pushing the limits. That is, and maybe the newer printers will go down that far. Raymond says they're not resin printers, they're polyjet technology. They use inkjet to inject the colour, says Shergel. Okay, but it is on a resin print, so. Anyway. Whatever it is, it's all beyond anything that we have at the moment for home printing. I get that. So Ed Scar says, the tech is industrial at the moment, very expensive, but eventually the tech may well come down to the cost of hobby level equipment. I mean, I only got into 3D printing in 2018, and I bought my first 3D printer, and they were fairly new out as home priced printers at the time. And now, I mean, wow, now everyone can buy one. They're £200. Bill Forrest, dimensionally stable equals fumble finger proof. Yeah, that's true. They, I've dropped resin and I've dropped FDM and I've broken both. So they do both break, and you can get both that will be more robust. But yeah. Dan's, this is Timers. I'm trying to make a decision on a printer for my model railroad. I can't have resin where I live. That's another plus point for FDM and why I like doing it. Talked myself out of a larger print bed, but hard to decide on one in my budget. Okay, so I'm just going to put my movie on, which will involve me disappearing for a minute while I sort out my camera again. Yep, let me remove that camera, add in the new camera. Oh, this is frustrating. I have no idea what I can do. I've now got 6 iOS cameras set up. Oh, there we go. And then I have to shrink myself down because otherwise you won't see the movie. That's fun. There we go. So I'm going to put this running in the background and I'll talk about it in a minute because there's a lot of quite repetitive similarity in it. This is about 7 hours of modelling, recorded, way more than that actually, just being sped up to an hour and a half. So there's quite a lot of speed increment on this. And this is FDM with support, just to be clear. What do you want to use it for is always a thing for printing. A lot of people love the A1s and the A1 minis, which are bed shifters and are, I mean, people put a 0.2 nozzle in and they do some really beautiful fine printing. FDM does need supports in a different way to resin, so it is difficult. But if you're not worried about the sort of size of print bed, a lot of people love their A1 minis. I really like my Bamboo, who make A1, but I've got a P1S which is enclosed and bigger and more expensive. There, I got it with the AMS, which is how I did the multicolor. It just feeds all this automatically. I load 4 different colors and it just feeds them and purges them and prints them and gets on with it. And that was $669 for all of that on the Black Friday sale. I think it was about 400 and something for the actual FDM printer without the AMS. So just to give you an idea. So Ravenson says they use some kind of UV ink that is printed in layers and hardened with UV light. Interesting. I mean, I've seen a Mimaki printer, but you know, it's just all happens inside, doesn't it? Atlantic, when I first started, I bought the Anna A8. Oh, my first printer, FDM printer, was an Anycubic i3 Mega. It wasn't Mega, and it broke, but that could be because I overheated it with an enclosure. Shergel says, I've broken landing gear on both. Yes, landing gear isn't great. For spaceships, landing gear can be a little bit. Mind you, the Trailblazer I like, because it just seems like the bulkhead comes out and just goes on the ground, so it's quite solid. Atlantic, way back in 2017 or 18. Sure, yeah. So FDM for buildings all the way, says Monique. Raymond also says they're also printers from Objet. They're like printing like inkjets, but the printers are very expensive. I think the colour ones start at €125,000. Too much for hobby use, definitely. Monique has an Anycubic Viper, has run seamlessly for a couple of years, and Atlantic also had the Mega S from Anycubic. Polite says those supports look quite interesting, maybe useful for some scratch building. So let me talk about what I'm doing going on in this stream. This is a pit droid. I've actually got 3 droids we're looking at this evening. The first one is the folded pit droid, and I want it as a test bed. It's going to be a little bit battered and rusty. It's going to be well weathered, unlike the other 2. So if there are any print fails, it wasn't going to be an issue. But actually, I've used it as my test bed on how to do the filling. And I'll talk more about that in a minute because it's an actual section of the video. But one of the things with FDM over resin, and you will need still to sand resin if you're doing like a sphere, because you can still get layer lines. And where I dry brushed something I printed in resin the other day, the dry brushing brought out all the layer lines. And I was just like, oh, in close up, because they were minis, you can really see the layer lines now where you couldn't see them before I dry brushed. And I was doing scratchy dry brushing for the Bad Batch because they have a very scratchy paint finish look. So, yeah, layer lines, whether you're printing in resin or FDM, are a part of 3D printing just because it puts down layers of material. And the good news about resin is that they're finer, so they're less obvious. These cards, apart from the first layer that's always 0.2, they're done at 0.08 layer height. And 0.08 is my new height for printing everything at. And if I was doing these droids now, which ironically, I actually printed these last year. Yep, these were all printed last year. This, I think, is February with me taking the parts off. So they were they were started last year. They were printed into this year, kind of going into this year. So yeah, they've been sat on the spare bed for like ever. And sadly, I shouldn't have pulled that bit off there. I realised afterwards. Sadly, not sadly, my friend's coming on Tuesday night and she wants to go in the spare bed. So I had to get Peter, this is Peter, and Pete, who's the one that's standing up, and Roger, who's the B1 battle droid, off the bed for her. Now, the observant view, you'll notice there's an awful lot of pulling supports off for the first bit of this video, and then you'll see it again for the next pit droid, and then you'll see it again for the B1 battle droid. But you'll notice that they're not that easy to get off, and they mar the surface far more than with a resin print. And that's partly because with FDM you're putting something hot onto something hot and hoping they don't stick. There are ways around that, and I actually have some PLA support material that's for multi-material printing with an AMS that came with the printer. But my worry with something like that is it would just take so much purging. You could use a fortune just to put this support material in. So anyway, this is what happens when you have a print that is designed for strength rather than looks, because this is designed to be a strong droid and you print it in the right direction for the layer lines to go in the direction that you're going to more likely snap. So if you have a piece like this and you print it standing upright, all the layer lines like this, it'll easily snap on a layer line and break. But if you print it like this and the layer lines are going in this direction, it's a lot stronger and it'll be much harder to snap. So all of these are printed in weird directions really, quite often, especially on the thinner parts, to try and get them to work. And they're also made to look like the real thing, and you just have to support them yourselves. And it's more or less the first time I've ever done supports, other than the little taxis I did, the yellow and black taxis I did that were by Philippe from Games Art. Let's go back to chat while this goes for a bit. So Tim says his original FDM printer from 2017 still works, but I've not used it for a while. My Anycube broke and I binned it, and then I haven't got any of my original printers. They've all gone in the bin or out for the metal men and other people. The AMS or not the AMS is the current question, says Dan. For the A1, it's different from the rest of the bamboo. I love my AMS, partly because it just keeps everything dry. And when it's raining all the time, I had everything in dry lots before, so it isn't a fast improvement from that point of view, but it does just make it simpler. And I think keeping filament dry is quite important at the moment. So Atlantic says, I'm currently printing with the Anchor Make M5. I've heard mixed things about those. Cricks on my print test team has one, and he had a lot of problems with it. Tim says he's broken 2 resin printers. I've broken one and dumped the other 2. I've actually spilt resin all through this one. I knocked all the resin everywhere when I moved it, and it's a mess. Ed says, I've made loads of terrain from 3D printer supports. I even changed the settings to make the top layer more prominent mesh, which is perfect for floor grating. That's interesting. I tend not to do much with it because I just have so much. I mean, this is literally loads. I just had this body filler from a different project I was working on. So this was a really manky part where the supports just were awful. And this was really badly put on, but it's a little bit dry and old as I'm putting it on, so it didn't go on very smoothly, and it was a bit of a nightmare. But you can see I'm sort of scraping up from something else that I'd be doing. So this is the reason this is on here, and at this point was just I had it sat around. I wouldn't actually use big boy body filler generally because it's harder to sand. I don't like sanding epoxy resin stuff. So this is my this is how you get supports off, kind of proper bit, where I'm using mini pliers most of the time to wrench them off, and they'll just wrench off, and then a blunt box cutter to kind of go between the pad at the top of the support, which is like a mesh as we just said, and the bottom of the print that's it's supporting. But these were a nightmare because there's just so many little bits. It took forever to get it out of all the fingers, and if I was designing this, I'd probably make it in separate parts. And actually the proper pit droid does have more parts to it, but a lot of it is just made for robustness of people using them for display. Tamsin, confession time. I haven't 3D printed anything for about a year. Haven't stopped backing 3D printing Kickstarters though. Hey, I haven't played Legion for a year. It hasn't stopped me buying Legion boxes. I haven't played Shatterpoint for a year. It hasn't stopped me buying Shatterpoint boxes. So I sometimes think, yeah, it's fine. As long as you're enjoying what you're spending your money on. So Dan says, I'd rather have the P1S, but currently the A1 is in range for me. Yeah, it is a case of whatever you can afford. I put it through my business because I obviously do use it for business only, really. All my stuff is business, really. So Monique's off. Better get ready for work. 6:23 a.m. Monday here. She's in Brisbane. Have a great week all. Thanks, Monique. Take care and good luck. Norm saying goodbye. So as does Digger. So Eddie, as much as I love the idea of having a 3D printer, I think I'll stick with old school scratch building at the moment. If that's what you enjoy, otherwise 3D printing just becomes a new hobby. So stick with what you enjoy is my recommendation always. Dan, question, do you paint all your prints? And if so, what's your preferred colour filament? Up until buying my P1S, I painted all my prints because I would spray putty them all. This is Overture Space Grey, which was my default for everything. I really like it. It's great because I'm mostly doing spaceships and terrain, or this is a droid. So if ever you scratch through to it, it's got a vaguely metallic look. So if I do this droid and I've got some really tight joints on them and it scuffs the paint off, which is very likely because they're friction fit, then that's fine because, you know, it'll have something silvery coming through. So all the droids, apart from some parts I put on that I'd missed and I put on the P1S last week, are in space grey. On my P1S, I will be defaulting to ash grey matte for all my parts that are spaceships. I actually had a latte brown for my desert Kickstarter and I didn't paint it. I literally didn't paint anything. It saved me a week's worth of painting. Now, it was fine for a desert temple. I did put a wash on some of them. It was a really hideous coloured wash that I'd used. And I did paint some of the other ones. So for the diorama, but for the actual displaying on a Kickstarter, I don't want my painting to be a reason people don't buy it. So yeah. So my preferred colour filament is something that matches. So I would generally print in a grey or a silver because that's mostly what I'm modelling. When I paint, I always do spray putty for all of these sort of filament prints to get rid of the layer lines or help get rid of them, minimise them, even if I'm not sanding. And as a result, the colour's kind of irrelevant. I'm about to start a really big Jump Room City project. Most of the supplies arrive tomorrow. And because of that, yeah, that's going to be using up all my old filaments. And I got some green and orange and all these other colours with the printer. But I'm looking at them thinking, I might make some signs. So I might keep the brightly coloured ones. And then the neon-esque signs and everything that goes into the city can be done in all the colours, and then I'll use them up. Right. Oh, and I should say, these files are by Droid Division on Etsy. SpongeBob's, I think his original name was, but Droid Division on Etsy. You can buy them. Thousands of people have printed them. They're really good. You'll see them all over the internet. I've seen a couple of people do them on Instagram recently. You know, they're very, very popular prints. And the Pit Droid, this is the folded one, but, you know, this arm is like the main one, is probably one of the most popular prints because of the size. It's quite small. It's not small, but it's quite small. Madman, I really want to print a Pit Droid. I really want to print a Pit Droid. Do you have a reco and a good file for purchase? Oh, Droid Division, Etsy. Really, really good. You know, having said that, I really struggle with the B1. So go on the Facebook group and just when you can't work out how the neck goes on, Google B1 neck, you know, or just neck, and there'll be loads of people asking the same question. What do I do with the neck ring? And when you can't work out the shoulder bolts because they literally are not going to fit and you can't work out what it is, then go on and you look at it and you go, oh, right, that isn't what I was expecting. That isn't the one in the list. And you'll find there's a few things that are just not quite clear, but the Facebook group makes them very clear. So Shergel says, I print resin at 30 micrometers and I still see layer lines. You will. I think you will. Depending on the part, but certainly on curves, you definitely will. Ramerson, before painting FDM parts, you have to use a filler, then sand them to get a fine surface, and then you have to use a primer before painting. Not necessarily. I have just painted some of my parts and then used depending what it is and what you're painting it, depends whether you feel you actually need to fill all the lines. So for my lava, I didn't fill anything. On the whole of my Corex campaign, I didn't fill a single thing. I sprayed them black, so it's already very dark, and I used a sponge for all the weathering. I did my Transport Delta without filling. I just did a couple of coats of spray putty. I didn't fill it. You can see the layer lines, but actually it's again very splodgy weathering. So what I mean, it's well worn with a weathering sponge. And so if you're going to do something that's heavily weathered with a load of different like sponge textures on that you can dab on, and as long as you avoid washes and dry brushing that bring out the layer lines, you can sometimes get away with just having the layer lines in there. It is one of those things that you should do it, but sometimes you're just lazy. So Madman says, I think I'm going to pick up an AMS for my P1S in the Black Friday sale. I would. I just like mine. Yeah. Oh, Atlantic loves his. Madman, nice if I had the AMS light on the I am really struggling. Right. Nice. I had the AMS light on the A1. It's a nice option. Yeah. I do like the AMS. Ravenson, it looks very painful seeing you to remove the supports. Maybe it's better to bring them in different parts that get glued together after giving them a nice surface finish. Yeah, the actual Pit Droid has these inserts as separate pieces, which made the supports far better. The folded one is actually the worst because everything's kind of integral. So it's a lot harder to get the bits out. This was nightmare. This was the worst bit, I think, of all the things I did on it. And yeah, it can be quite painful. Because you're trying to get small bits. I could have, said, oh, I won't put supports there. And I did actually not have supports in some places, but then this overhang wouldn't have printed. Shergel, it doesn't take too long for materials to cost more than the printer. Oh, yeah. The amount I have spent on, filament. I ran out of grey halfway through doing the Trailblazer. I literally had 3 wraps on the roll left when it finished the last part of the... I've only done the bottom part so far because I've been doing the multicolor instead. And I was like, oh, I haven't got any more grey. So I ordered 8 rolls because it's my go-to colour going forward. And then found I had 2 in a box that I hadn't noticed that I put on one side. So yeah. Tim says, I can afford a P1S, but it's too big for my space. Need to buy a bigger home. Yep, I probably could do with more space as well. So Shergel says, I'm thinking of trying Polymaker Panchrome, Starlight, Mars and Mercury for my next ship. That sounds good. Never mind anything else. It sounds amazing. I actually used the Polyterra mixed berries for the box. I didn't like how it printed because it's kind of blue on one side or purple on one side and red on the other. And it looked really good in the picture of the guy who'd done the box when it was on Makerworld. Mine didn't print at all looking like that, so I don't know. Timbers, I think I would have had the Dremel in that crack. So the problem with PLA is it melts if you put stuff on it that's too... We'll get to that in a minute when you see how I'm filing it and what I'm filing it with. So Atlantic says, I'm currently printing a knitting machine as a Christmas gift. I hope the build goes smoothly. Oh, yes. That sounds fun. That sounds really good. Yeah. So Dan's model railroading. I will look for a silver filament as I want to create modern passenger cars. Yeah, I've got a silver. They're not shiny silver, and you can get metal filaments. Mine's just a basic PLA. It's not a metal filament, and it's okay. It's got a sheen to it. Of course, the smaller the layer line, the more likely you are not to have to sort of paint it. For silvers, I've generally painted, to be honest. But it's if they scuff back, it's useful. So Atlantic Adventures, better than knitting a printing machine. Oh, not good. Multicolor has more waste, that is definitely true. I was shocked at how much waste there was on a tall multicolor print. For something like this, you know, it's a small project, I'm going to do it. For my signs, I'm going to do them to be multicolor, and I'll make it so you don't have to do them multicolor. I'll do 2 options, but yeah. So Bill says, this is a very large build, Kathy, one large droid. This is the smallest of all the droids that you'll see this evening. This is much smaller. You wait till Roger comes along in, I don't know, a little bit. So, I used, for this, presser. So this was sliced on presser slicer, and it was printed mostly on my Neptune 3 Plus. For the size, especially when it comes to the taller parts, and the heads that are quite wide, they needed to go on the 3 Plus to get the side. It does up to 320 build plate, so you can do a foot across. The smaller ones tended to go on the presser, and both of them print really bad surfaces on top of supports. So the other thing you'll notice is these are all done at 0.2 because they're older, slower machines, and they took weeks printing all this as it was. I mean, it was weeks and weeks of printing. Around doing my test prints on which mostly went on the Neptune 3. So they went in a lull between my Kickstarters when I wasn't doing a lot of test printing. So I will say that the quality on curved parts, if we look at the one in the foreground, which is the sort of hips, you can see the rings on that. And that's because it's 0.2 layers on a fairly shallow dome. And that dome, what do I do with that? I mean, it's either going to be filled or it's got to be sanded. But PLA doesn't really sand well. And there'll be a technique in a minute, which I'll try, because I saw it on Instagram. And about halfway through, actually after I'd done the technique and I had to sand it flush, I remembered that this was PLA, and he was a professional prop maker. And he probably used ABS, and his sanding went really quickly, really easily. I could not sand my PLA to go flush. I've sanded it 5 or 6 times, and it's probably flush now after the last sanding, after layers of filler and everything. So I've sanded it right back. But one of the problems with PLA and printing in it is these bad surfaces are really hard now to deal with because they're rough for 2 reasons. 1, supports. 2, just print orientation, giving you curves like that where there's very thick layer lines. So a 0.2 doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a 0.2 step where I want a smooth curve. You couldn't do these in resin, it just wouldn't support its weight. So you're going to be doing them in FDM. The chances are you're probably going to use PLA. Because most people still print in PLA. You could use Pecca, but I don't think its surface finish is as good. I think that looks suspiciously like the last part, but from the other angle. But anyway, so all in all, this whole thing is a ticulously long-winded amount of time taking supports off. And at the end of the 7 hours of footage, and probably 3, 4, 5 times that amount of actual getting everything off, I still only have assembled droids. They're not primed, they're not filled, they're not painted. They're literally just still in the space grey colour. So, has anyone done anything in chat this large? I'd be intrigued to see whether people have done things this large, or whether it's just an unusual thing that people don't generally do. I have a number of droids I'd like to do. I've got files. You know, Tamsin was saying she buys 3D print Kickstarters and she hasn't 3D printed anything in ages. I buy files on some things just because I want them. So I also have some Imperial probe droids, the Maul variety, a gonk droid, which I want to make into a power unit because gonks are power droids. They're giant batteries on legs. And I've also got a Huyang, which was a charity one. Huyang's one of my favourite Clone Wars characters. Helpsy's voiced by David Tennant, one of my favourite Doctors. And he was probably one of the best things in Ahsoka, live action Huyang. Great character. Also a droid. He's a few thousand, I think he might be 25,000 years old or something. And he does the lightsabers for Jedi, if you don't know who I'm talking about. But these, you start going on the Droid Division sort of Facebook page, and you follow a few people on Instagram who do droids, and you can see that droids quickly become an obsession. But it's, where do you put a 6-foot-high battle droid? I mean, he's been sat on my spare bed for months, almost a year now. And I've actually done the posable leg version, which doesn't stand on its own weight because its weight will eventually bend on the bolts because you just won't tighten them enough. So as a result, my version is going to be seated or reclining, or anyway, I wanted to be able to pose him so I can put him in the on the sofa and things like that. Could actually just put him on the sofa. That would freak burglars out if they came, wouldn't they? A B1 battle droid on the sofa. Maybe not a bad idea. I have to make sure my weathering's well sealed. So there we go. Ed says, I wouldn't print anything this big for the simple reason that I don't own anything this big. I don't have this type of space. My biggest 3D prints are wargaming terrain. Yeah, mind you, the amount of wargaming terrain I've got fills so much space. So Bill says, well, I've missed the last couple of streams and I'm afraid I'm going to have to watch this on flip side as I have a ridiculously early start tomorrow. Well, Bill, thank you for popping in for just a short bit, and enjoy your day tomorrow. Raymondson, ABS is even better, especially when you'll rework with parts with mechanical methods like drilling holes or make threads. With PLA, this is a nightmare. Yeah, ABS is great to work with, but it is a nightmare to print. I tried printing in ABS. I had warps, I had stuff coming off the build plate left, right and centre. I put enclosures around so it was all nice and even. It melted my printer because the enclosures got too hot, so then I vented the top. And I have to say, it stinks and it's in your house, and ABS fumes aren't great. And basically, I wouldn't touch ABS now. I just wouldn't go there, because no matter how great it is to post-process, it is really, really difficult to get to print well. So I've got some Petga to try for mechanical parts. I understand that it doesn't finish as well as PLA, but it's much stronger and it will take the higher temperatures, and it's much better for functional parts. And actually I was thinking of, I've got a couple of helmets that I've printed. One's a Rex, and I'm obviously partway through my Titanfall one and have been for several years. Notice a theme here. And I think I might be printing a helmet in Petga in the future. I don't know how that sounds, but instead of ABS, I think I probably would look at ASA if I wanted to go down that route, which is another similar thing, but it has the same problem with smells. And because I do this in my house and I print 24/7, I have a separate little room I can shut, and I can put an extractor fan on. And obviously these are enclosed. At the moment, the top's got a crack in it, a deliberate gap, and I leave the door open because PLA doesn't need a heated enclosure like some of the others do. So I've got enclosed machines, but I wouldn't do ABS for, no matter how beautiful it is to work with, it just isn't beautiful on the print side for me. And other people, and maybe with this printer it would go better, but I just hear a litany of people moan about it. And also I'm actually mostly printing for test prints for my Kickstarters. So PLA is what everyone else prints in, so it's probably what I'm going to end up staying printing. And most people have done their droids in PLA, to be honest. It seems to work well enough for them, so there we go. But yeah, you're right. It is definitely much better with drilling holes or making threads. But for PLA, when I needed a thread, I put in a knurled nut. And those are the ones that you heat with your soldering iron and pray that it's going in straight when you put it in there, because it kind of melts into the plastic. So, bye Bill. Droidica, never, Shergel. I don't have space. So I think I did the little, instead of the big Sith, the Imperial probe droids, the little Sith ones, because I'm more of a Clone Heroes fan and Maul has those. And I just, the Gonk will be useful. I'm going to use it like a table. But Droid can know. They're massive. They're really massive. People have printed them. Like, it's a quarter the size of this room practically. So Tim says, I don't have a spare bed for something this big. My prints tend to be small. I do a lot of prints, but don't get through that much filament or resin. I literally test print everything, every variation, to make sure I've not missed a clip hole or something. So I end up with a lot of stuff. I mean, I normally have 4 or 5 fold flat crates of test prints from every Kickstarter. So yeah, I go through a lot. Eric, where do you put a 6-foot battle droid? I think about that very question every time I look at mine. I feel, oh, brilliant. And where do you put yours, Eric? Where did you put it? Jeff says, you'll put it wherever it will fit. That's true. I was looking at my bath the other day thinking, I never bath. I wonder if I could have it in there. Then I was wondering if I could Photoshop on like an oil bath effect into it. So I could do a photo of my B1 having an oil bath, because that's what droids have. Shergel says you can print ABS on top of a peel-off layer of another material. Jantech Engineering did this on a video recently. That's interesting. I know somebody who did Petga supports with PLA prints, because he said they come off really easily. And again, it's different, so you can do it. But with the multicolor requiring so much priming and purging, I think it would just cost you a fortune in stuff you've flushed effectively. And again, ABS, just that smell. Use a filter with activated carbon when you're using ABS for printing. That helps with the smell. Yeah, I just don't want to go there. It's just me. I mean, for some people, ABS will be perfect, but it just wasn't a great product for printing when I used it. It just warps like mad. When you're printing it, it's very fussy to print. And I just want to be able to put my prints on, bang them on, and out they pop, and not spend 10 attempts trying to get one block to print squarely. And also, because the majority of the stuff that I print is for test prints for people printing PLA on standard printers, I'm never designed large parts that will fit on a bigger printer, so they're all about 180, and I'm not going to do it with anything but PLA for those. So it doesn't encourage me for the 1 or 2 projects like this that are separate to kind of get ABS down pat, because then I'd have to work out the supports for ABS, and it's just me being lazy really. Eric says you should look at the DD rat catcher. It's small like the pit droid and double. Oh, that is on my list. That is very cute. And actually, an AZ would be my next one. AZ from the Bad Batch. I think I actually might do an AZ before I did a rat catcher. Yeah, so Shergel saying Petga and PLA. So John from Second Dynasty said, he uses Petga supports and PLA for the print. The only problem is this multicolor just uses so much that I'm just reluctant to do it. Shergel says you only do a couple of layers of PLA and the rest with ABS. Yeah. So Ed says ABS has been very consistently inconsistent. That is very true. It is very consistently inconsistent. I'm not a fan of it. Jeff says I have tool changing printers, so no weight on changing colours or material. That makes such a difference. And someone was saying the next bamboos will be for separate heads, so that you can have 2 or 3 without purging as much. Yeah, you did confuse me, Ed, saying that. But yeah, it is definitely the way to go, having multiple heads. But again, it's a bigger printer because the heads have to come off the bed completely, so you need that extra space around the edges. So the thing I would buy next is a bigger Core XY. So all of these printers that I've got here are bed shifters, they call them. But what happens is probably what you're used to. You have your bed and you have your big poles sticking up, and your print head on your extruder goes up on the Z axis and goes back and forth on the X. Well, the uprights don't move, but it goes back and forth on a cable on the X. And then the bed goes back and forth on the Y. So the bed moves. These new bamboos and a lot of the newer printers coming out, not the A1, but the P1S and the P1P and the X1C, they are Core XY. So they have a massive long belt, which moves the print head in X and Y. It's kind of diagonal and it moves on the X and Y with this diagonal. I haven't worked it out in my head how it works, but anyway, that's how it works. And the bed just goes down. As a result, the bed doesn't wobble as much, so you can print your taller Z height stuff without the wobbles that you get in other printers. So, you know, it can be better from that point of view. I really struggle with, I mean, the things are all well labelled, but I really struggled with working out how this actually all went together, if I'm honest. The Pit Droid has good instructions. He redid them in 2023. The Battle Droid hasn't needed redoing, and the instructions are quite old, and I've got a couple of misprints on. One of the arms is really badly, it had a fail at the end. I'm like, this is a battered old Pit Droid, so it doesn't really matter that it's failed. But because of that, some of my stuff doesn't go together that well. And I did find this really, really hard to just put together sometimes and work out how things won't. It was a bit of a shock because I'm used to stuff just clip, you know. But anyway, these are my... this was printed in this direction. The other Pit Droid actually prints in a different orientation. The base is one piece, and I did that on my bigger printer, so I could do it in one piece. And then the top piece is another piece of that head, so it doesn't split like this. So for this one, I've glued it with Araldite, 5-minute epoxy. It's my go-to glue for doing big prints like this. They've got dowels in, so they don't move too much. You can see I just put on a thin layer, doing a small bit at a time, blob it on around the dowels that he uses for alignment. We'll talk more about the dowels in the B1 Battle Droid when we get there, because I had a bit of a dowel meltdown, and just put it together. Now that looks quite smooth. There's actually not much of a gap. But just about the time I'd done this, I watched something on Instagram, and the guy was like, this is the perfect way to do your joined prints. So what happens over time, he says, is that, and bear in mind he does this professionally, you know, you'll do this and you'll fill it, and the filler will move and heat and shrink at a different rate to your PLA, or in his case, ABS. And so you'll end up with gaps and cracks appearing over time. And I've got joints in the middle of all my legs on all of these, really for height, and this head here. So I was like, oh, I'm going to test this methodology that he showed, that he said is the ultimate way not to get these cracks appearing. I wish I had realised he'd done it in ABS. And there is actually a line there. There will always be a line there, because the beds elephant foot a bit, and if they don't elephant foot, they just don't seem square, because circular, you know, nozzles are squirting out circular shaped bits of plastic. So his method was, you take a piece of, this is why the mask has gone on, it's an organic filter mask, high, you know, high whatever, and everything has to move across because the lead on my soldering iron isn't that long. And he basically went over it with a soldering iron and then used a piece of filament to fill the gap. Looks really simple, and, you know, should be really simple, until you hit the fact PLA doesn't sand. So I went down here, you're creating a little groove in some ways, and this is just a bit I don't normally use, and it's a bigger soldering iron than I normally use. So this did really stink, and I've got a fan going, and I'll have the windows open and all this sort of stuff because it's in my house. But I'm, you know, so far so good. It's created a little bit of a lip. You know, it's very simple to do. I'm thinking, oh, this isn't a bad technique. You know, it's going to be a bit like a weld line. But you basically go in and then you put your bit of whatever there and you smooth it over and you create this, you try not to push it into it, but you create this sort of weld, I guess. And because it is the same plastic, it's a different colour for this, because this just happened to be the end I had there, and I thought it'd be useful to have it a different colour so I could see it. You know, because it's there, same one, when you sand it back, it's going to show as a different colour because it is, but it's the same material, so it'll heat and shrink, it won't crack. Yeah, I'll just leave you with that thought. So Ed says, something I've had a lot of use out of is a 3D pen, especially the extruder for an FDM printer, but without the printer, just as a pen. It's very useful for joining, gap filling and fixing. Far easier than pressing in with a soldering iron. I can imagine, and I hope it would do a thinner amount. So Eric says, I switch from usually soldering iron and filament to plastic weld to instead using a 3D pen that is the same filament I printed whatever part I'm using. You can get more control that way. I mean, having done this, I'm never doing it again. So, but I kind of look at the 3D pens and think they could be quite useful. Now this is what I'm using to sand everything. This is for your heel. It basically is to get rid of the dry skin on the back of your heel. And I'm not using it for that, don't worry. There isn't any dead skin in this. And it plugs in, so you don't have to worry about batteries. But I was like, yep, I'm going to try this. Why this over, you just stick the sort of things on, you know. They're the sanding pads. You just stick them on. They're just glue. There's nothing else holding them. But why this over a mouse? I actually have a mouse on the floor at the moment, and I use it. I'm going to use it on the B1 Battle Droid legs probably because it's bigger. But this is slower than a mouse and a mouse sander. You might have been watching me try and get through this. And what you'll find is that a mouse sander will actually melt your plastic if you do it too much in one location. You know, you have to be quiet. And then it goes soft and clogs and breaks off. It doesn't sand. So this is slower. It's never going to get through PLA that much. But it is good at taking the rough edges off, those layer lines, you know, that part we looked at before. It's good for knocking those edges off. It is slower and it will eventually do this. I have spent hours sanding this seam. I really regret this seam. I just wish I had the crack, to be honest. But yeah, but I do like the idea of having a 3D pen that can put a small amount out. Here comes the mouse. It lives in that cupboard down there. Graham says, can anyone help? I've got a cowboy figure and want to display gun smoke from his pistol. How do I do it? Gun smoke's a really hard one. If you don't mind it, you can get 3D print effects for blasters and gun smoke and all that kind of stuff. And I've used them for jetpacks, which is, it's kind of cool. It does work. But the other thing I've used is quilt sort of wadding for like cushions or quilts. Polyfiber it's called. And it's okay, but it does, you can see the lines in it. You can see it's made up of threads. But cotton wool is another one you can use. So those are the three main things that are used, short of actually doing a full smoke thing. But yeah, it's actually quite hard to do because smoke is nebulous and printing models aren't. Jason, thank you for joining Ground Cover. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. So my Patreon. I don't really mention my Patreon much. I do a video every week, which is normally just a 5-minute update, unless I've got an early release, in which case you get a 24-hour early release on the video that's going out. But given that my YouTube channel's had very little at the moment, you know, it's not been a lot of early releases. And I try on a Tuesday or probably a Wednesday if I've forgotten on the Tuesday, sometimes a Thursday if I've forgotten on both those days, to do a 5-minute update on, you know, this week I talked about my new AMS and how I'd manage humidity in the air for filament, which is a real problem and actually does make a difference on your prints. I notice it on the one printer that is just on a the thing it comes with to hold it, you know, one of those spool holders. Definitely by the end of the print, the quality is different to the start of the print. And I think about it, I've still got, when this print finishes, it's nearly finished. I'm going to have to put that one back in a packet. So there we go. So Tamsin says, PLA does sand. Cosplay folks like Frankly Built sand PLA all the time. It doesn't sand nicely, Tamsin. What it does is it kind of fibres a little and just, it doesn't go smooth. It sands to this kind of rough texture, and it isn't easy to sand because it's actually quite, this is a hard print. Look at the effort I'm putting into this, and you can see this is not sanding back. There was a good hour plus of sanding on this line. If that had been ABS, it would have sanded much quicker. It really would have. ABS is just a slightly different texture to it. So ABS, you can sand to a smooth finish. PLA is harder to do that. And people do sand it all the time. I mean, I'm sanding it all the time. But if you get it too hot, it melts. And actually, where I used that mouse, the reason I stopped using it was it was starting to peel the white and bring it off in chunks and actually then put holes in underneath. So it was putting holes in. So having sanded that was February. This then sat on the spare bed until this week when I did this for, you know, getting it off the spare bed. There we go. So, and this is me, I literally wrote the wrong bits on the bottom all the time. I didn't bother sanding the bit underneath, and actually I've had to come and sand it today. And I wasn't quite as careful as it could be underneath because I think it's going to be hidden because this is the fold away one. Remember, I kept changing what I've written on the top and the bottom because I got very confused about this. Yeah, I really, you know, they say about measure twice, cut once. Really, it should have been engage brain about what's on the top and what's on the bottom. So I'm going to choose to fill these layer lines. Now this isn't a bad one. It's got that gap there. But I wanted to test out just something for filling the layer lines other than tons of spray putty, because it normally takes 3 or 4 coats of spray putty to really get rid of layer lines easily. And I saw this technique on Instagram. I do follow a lot of cosplay people, Tamsin. And, you know, it's interesting that, you know, there's all these techniques I'm trying, and I'm doing them on this folded one because it is going to be a bit corroded. Though, to be fair, I don't think Droids are made out of something that rusts. So I need to decide what the corroded, it's going to be more worn and chipped, I guess. But I need to decide what the base colour is. So yeah. Ramerson says, this looks very painful. Maybe use a V-groove so you can welt the parts with filament together with less material on the surface. I did use the soldering iron to put the groove in, but there was just more material on the surface than there probably needed to be. And it's still there. You can still see that white is bigger than that groove. So I'm using 2 products that people rave about on Instagram and videos and stuff like this. The first one is Liquitex Acrylic Modelling Paste. And I spent way too much time putting this on. But somebody had demonstrated using a piece of foam as like a spatula rather than a brush because you can get a smoother finish with it. And I understand totally why you might use it because actually it's curved and it's soft, so you can create a much nicer finish than you would with a solid spatula. So this is just a piece of EVA foam that I had on the side. It actually came with a model attached on it from Rebel Base Builds, his Scorpion droid, and it went back in a diorama when I gave him the diorama. And for this, I'm just putting it on. Now, I did the spatula ones on this side. I just went over this far too many times. But what I found was this is a firm texture, but slightly thinner than the wood. And I found it harder to get a thin coat on both of them. So you end up with a lot more product on when you're doing this kind of filler, and this groove really doesn't help, and I don't think I'd filed out the hole. So I ended up doing this about 50 times, as you can see. I think as you get more confident, you do it fewer amounts of times. But the way the spatula application works is it fills a thicker layer. So when you sand, there's 2 or 3 layers actually, sort of 2 or 3 blemishes that you'll get on a piece like this. One of which is the layer lines. The other is where the infill hits the walls. So my infill is cross, like this, and it's cross, and where it hits the walls, crosses obviously create squares. I get little ripples over the crosses just because it comes out and then the plastic droops ever so slightly as it goes between the supports. And this is the infill I'm talking about. I really put too much water in this, by the way. Not such a problem with this, but more of a problem with the wood filler, which became quite too, it didn't react well to being thinned with water, let's put it that way, and being firm afterwards. But anyway, I then went with, the most common thing that everybody does is they thin these products slightly and they put them on with a brush. I proved to myself several things with this. One, it's really hard to mix with a sponge brush. Two, I really cannot keep mixing in the bowl. I mean, it's a little goo chocolate mousse dish, but you know, it's glass because it doesn't react, but this just took forever. Even sped up, this looks like it taken forever, and it did. And actually, it was still a bit too thin. I probably should have put more product in, but anyway, there we go. So this is an experiment to see which of these is the best thing, and we're going to follow it all the way through. So Robinson says, I use 2K polyester filler that is also used for cars. For me, that's the best material, but sand it with water to bind the dust. Did you notice at the beginning I used that big boy epoxy filler? That was 2K. I said it's epoxy, it could be polyester. It stinks, and you have to, it smells when you dust it, and I do always wet sand it. I struggled a bit with this, so I prefer to wet sand, and you'll see that in a minute. And the reason I like to wet sand is just that it keeps the dust down. What I find though is that heel grinder doesn't kick the dust up like the mouse does. Partly because it's a lower revs, and so it doesn't throw the dust into the atmosphere. But I do put on a dusting sand mask and I've got a filter right in front here that you can't really see. And I use that to sort of suck the air, because I don't want the dust going into the atmosphere in my workroom either, because it just comes down all your surfaces and, you know, it gets inches thick over the years. So what I would say is I'd always wet sand, but actually these are both acrylic products and they don't. If you've done an epoxy, but the epoxy is far harder. So sanding the epoxy is actually much harder than sanding the wood filler. So if you're doing a functional part like a helmet, I would say, yeah, definitely. You know, epoxy filler is a good one. I'm trying to do this with more friendly products like wood filler that are water-based, that are still sandable. They're probably not as robust, but they're just so much easier to use and clean up. And they don't have the going off time that epoxy does. I've got acres to fill. I mean, acres of this stuff. I've got 2 heads like this. I've got a whole B1 battle droid. I need to come up with something that's cheap, easy, and doesn't stink. So there we go. Ravenson says, I have too fine a nose for model maker. No, I'm a professional that does this sometimes all day, and I'm just not willing to sit with the headaches it gives me. I'm not willing to sit in a house that stinks of spray paint and polyester. You know, this isn't about a nose, this is about my health, because I live in this house and I work in it. And when I was working as a content creator, I was doing this all day for hours on end, and it's just not healthy. You know, it's not about having a fine nose. This is about health and the fact that I don't want cancer in 20 years' time, probably getting near the end of my life in 20 years' time. I don't want cancer because I didn't pay attention to the chemicals and didn't use all the right sort of safety equipment. And having had it in my kitchen for so long, it really is it goes through the whole house when it's there. This workshop's upstairs. I've got fans on. It's easier in some ways, but trust me, you don't want to be doing that kind of thing in your house. So this is a safety thing, not oh, I mind the smell. I don't really want to have to wear a mask all day. I have got days and days of filling and sanding. I did half the filling and sanding in a couple of hours this afternoon on these sorts of parts, just for this folded droid. And I've literally put it on, the wood filler, and then sanded it off. And I wore the more comfortable than the organic solvents mask, sort of sanding mask. But when I'm putting on epoxy filler, I have an organic solvents mask on. And if I was to look at it and use it for all of this time here, and some people use wood filler with acetone and they rave about it. And I'm just like, yeah, I get that. You know, I get that you guys want to do that. They're mostly people in their 20s. I don't want to sit there with a mask on day in, day out, really. So if I can do this without a mask, I've only got to wear it when I'm sanding, and it's a more comfortable mask. So yeah, this product seems to have gone on easier. So actually I like the wood filler, but it's grainier. It's got a little bit of grit to it. And it is thicker. When you look at it, I put on a much thicker amount. I'm not going to spoil the ending. I'll talk through my conclusions in a minute. And you can see that little bit of epoxy filler down there in a nightmare place to get to with a sander, may I add, to sand it. It's going to be emery boarded later. But I think that's actually going to be maybe the underneath. So I may not be too fussed about it. I'm not sure you'll actually ever see it. I could do with reassembling this and working out which is the top before I spend a lot of time on it. Yeah. It did seem better though, Norm. I will go with that. Yeah, I prefer the wood filler for thicker filling. So Tim says, rail enthusiasts seem to love seeing black smoke pouring out of the chimney. As a fireman, I think I have to breathe that. So I do not make black smoke for my health. Also a sign of poor combustion. Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't see the smoke. It's not really that good. So what I've done here was just using up these products, really. I wanted a slightly bigger area than that was easier just to sand. Now this is a foot. It's got some nice square planes on it. So it should be easier to sand. I am going to probably spray everything with spray putty, which will get rid of any fine scratch marks from sanding and layer lines that I've somehow not quite filled. But even then, this is, you know, these are my older printers. There are layer lines. It's all done at 0.2. And all of these parts, especially the top of the toes at the front there, the two sort of bits that are sticking down, they are very ridged. And so I had a bit of a thought here. Should I sand everything first to get rid of all those and then come back and put this on? Or shall I put this on, sand it, and then come back and try the white one over the top? And I'm still debating how I'm going to do it. I'm going to probably have to fill everything a couple of times on the worst parts, because once just doesn't seem to be enough. But this one, which I made a bit thicker, redid the mixture a bit thicker, seems to sort of, the modelling paste seems more solid when it's been thinned and dried. The wood filler seems a lighter weight product. It doesn't seem to be as robust. Now, whether it is or it isn't, it's certainly softer and easier to sand than epoxy filler by a long way. So for me, where I'm going to be plastering it onto so many backs of parts, and you know, when we're looking at the arms, the ability to put it on with a bit of soft foam and get a really quite nice finish on it, and then sand that back till I start seeing the plastic from the 3D print coming through, that is actually a really beneficial thing for me. Now, I'm not sure that realistically these thinned ones did much for the layer lines. I think they were too thin, and I didn't feel that this was a great use of time. I felt like you put it on and then it didn't quite do enough to address the layer lines, but took quite a long time of putting it all on, especially on these. So John says, Tim, he far prefers the effect of steam on a bright cold day than black or yellow smoke with some of the new coal people are using these days. Yeah, can't get Welsh steam coal anymore. It was always the best, as we'll all know from either the engine or actually Thomas the Tank Engine. because didn't Thomas have a cold and he needed proper Welsh steam coal to clear out his innards. Yeah. And I think people do get steam and smoke confused. When they say it's a steam engine, I think they forget that it is mostly steam coming out. So they kind of expect it to be black. Well, actually, you know, the best days for taking photos, it seems to be a clear, cold winter days. I'm judging by the amount of photos in the winter, because then you get the steam looking good. So now we're on to sanding. This has got a lot of whatever I last sanded on it, which is why it's white. I'm trying to think what I last sanded. Obviously something with plaster or something. Anyway, I dry sanded the middle quadrants to see what it was like dry sanding, because I love wet sanding, and this is mostly whatever was already in that brush. But I wanted to wet sand. I really wanted to wet sand this. So I dry sanded it, and I've created some artificial humps between these four corners on this. And I will say that the Liquitex actually sands really nicely. The wood filler sands really nicely. The wood filler seems softer, but actually it's easier to see when it's being sanded, because the Liquitex dries quite clear. And when you sand it, it goes white, but it's not the same. And then I wanted to wet sand, because I always prefer to wet sand. So wet sanding is definitely my thing. I definitely would rather wet sand, and that's what Rameson was talking about earlier, especially if you're doing something like an epoxy putty. But what I found was wood filler wet sanding, it's like bye-bye wood filler. It's just gone. It just came straight back off again. It didn't even stay in the grooves. It literally just came back off. So you can see, just I did a quick little thing and the whole lot's gone. It's not even sitting in. Whereas the Liquitex did actually seem to keep a little bit more. But again, they're both acrylic products, and I think diluted, they're not that robust. And even the wood filler, just wet sanding is just a no-no with it. The good news is, where I've been sanding, and I've been using, because I did a lot of sanding this afternoon of wood filler, where I've been sanding and doing the sort of heel grinder, it mostly falls down, you know. Even if you didn't have a mask on, I don't think you'd get a lot in your lungs. But obviously I had a mask on. Whereas these, the thinned ones, by the time I sanded it, I didn't feel like there was a lot of benefit left, if I'm honest. Tim says, still got some Welsh coal in Bala. Well, you are in Wales. Not much of it left now, though. I think we'll be on Polish next year. Polish, does that clinker more? I've heard it's better. Rob says, hello Kathy, sorry I'm late, I have to watch a rerun tomorrow. Oh, you've missed actual modelling this week, Rob, but great to have you here. Better late than never. John, not sure what Statfold have been using for the last few years, but some of the smoke is very yellow with sulphur. Yeah, you do see that. And we'll spot the Brits by the pH in sulphur and the Americans by the F in sulphur. So that'll be interesting to see. So yeah, having put it on diluted, I then went outside and spray puttied it. Why? Because it's not, you ask. I was trying to see if this wash would bring out the remaining layer lines so that I could show them better on camera, because they're really hard to see on spray putty. It didn't, is the short takeaway from this. But anyway, you've got the video of me doing it. So I tried spray putty, because that's what my final thing was. I was going to have a coat of spray putty. So if it gets it 90% there and spray putty gets it the last 10%, I don't need to put the effort in to get it the last 10%, because spray putty will do that. So I wanted to see whether with spray putty how these all worked. That wash was just an acrylic wash, so it should dry quite quickly, but I'm in a rush. I wanted to get on with this, so out comes the hairdryer. If you don't have a hairdryer, you haven't lived. And then I wet sanded this. Now I think, I'm dry sanding here, but actually I went and wet sanded it because spray putty wet sands beautifully. But my worry is that what you have is something that doesn't wet. So you have your 3D print at the bottom. You have an acrylic product that doesn't wet sand well. And then you have a product that does wet sand well on top. And I'm worried that when I was taking off the top product, I was taking the bottom product off straight away as soon as the wet got through this top product. So I'm not sure that I would actually recommend wet sanding. And actually sometimes with spray putty, I don't really wet sand it that much. If it's gone on with a nice coat, I did put a bit of a run in my primer, but the spray putty went on well. If it's gone on with a nice coat, I almost feel like sometimes it's done its job and you don't actually need to sand it that much. So there might be flat areas where I put it on, it looks smooth and I go, actually I don't feel the need to sand this now. And if this was a helmet, I wouldn't be using acrylic products in the middle. I would be doing it with just layers and layers of spray putty, because that's my favourite way of doing helmets. But all my future helmets, and I may redo the Rex one, are going to be on the bamboo, and I'm probably going to do them at 0.08 or something, and just take the 3-day hit to print a helmet or whatever, or day and a half to print a helmet, and just not really seem to have any layer lines at all. What is also interesting is I have some matte filament, and I feel like the matte filament sands a lot better. I sanded it quickly, and I think because it's already matte, it actually sands so much better. So I'd be intrigued to see. I don't feel matte filament's as strong as basic filament, and I need to do some Googling about it before I print anything other than terrain really with it. Because I have a feeling that it sounds better because it's got this, whatever it is that makes it matte. So whether that then creates something that's easier to sand in PLA, I don't know, but it just doesn't feel as strong as this one. So I took it outside and painted it red just because I wanted a different colour, and grey obviously could be there. And this is just red oxide primer. You can see that that line there is the gap between the two different types, and I just didn't sand that down properly. You can see the line is still there. I've resanded that again. And then you can, oops, scratched it. You can actually see the layer lines, less on the spatula parts. You can't really see that. They're mostly poor sanding issues, where the wet sanding dragged it off. But you could, on the two that were thinner, you could still see the layer lines just. It really shows up when you're weathering it. And especially on the Liquitex one, which was a thinner going on, you could also see those crosshatch of infill patterns. So it isn't on this video because I did it this afternoon and this video took forever to render out, and had already rendered. Because of that, I'm just, yeah, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to use that for any parts that are big domes like this. I'm probably going to use the spatula to put extra on. So this is the pit droid, the standing pit droid. So we'll see him come through now, all the way through from beginning to end. And it's very similar to the folded pit droid in some ways. But you know, this will be easier to sand straight up. There are some details, you can see those little raised bits, but generally everything is just in flatter, bigger planes. And if you look at the circles on these, a lot of my biggest problems will be the circles. The circles aren't round. They aren't round because where they've printed flat on the plate, the bottom is slightly flattened, and then it does a weird out because the bottom of circles do not print well. Circles are a nightmare to print end on a printer. They're too shallow top and bottom for a printer to do well. And that's where you get a lot of the layer lining issues. So just like before, there's a lot of taking off of supports, and I printed all these one after the other without learning a huge amount of lessons on supports. Some people use tree supports. I just use the grid ones. I think for these big square product, prints like this, the grid ones actually I prefer. Some of the stuff where it goes higher up, I do think you could get better results with tree, and certainly some shapes are better with trees. But for this sort of thing, I was very happy with the grids. And actually 90% of the time, the blunt box cutter just slides in between the two parts and they just pop off. So, what have we got here? Ed, of course I have a hairdryer. Yeah, I have 2 hairdryers, one's for my hair. I assume the wheelie bin got a coating too. It did, yes, Jewel, but I didn't bother taking a photo. I thought I've got enough photos of me using the wheeling bins. There will be when I do the final coats probably, but this was just for the test for this. I actually did do it. It's in the, I did it on the phone, but forgot to put it into the program, so I'll take it out. Ed says, got it for 50p on Facebook Market years ago. I think mine's a travel one and was only a few pounds. My first travel one I had was free with something. So this might be that one. It might be the free one I got with something. It's just so cheap. So Tim says, we're back on coal. The Polish coal burns well, but is smoky and you need about 30% more. I don't recall clinker being a problem. That will be a different country then. The Welsh coal has been variable the last few years, sometimes good, sometimes bad clinker. Interesting, because Welsh was always supposed to be some of the best steam coal. Tamsin, my tech fund does a lot of video testing different filaments for strength, etc. I'll have a look at that, Tamsin, when I'm coming to do the next big prints. At the moment, I'm doing the Trailblazer by Tellus War Games, and it's funny printing something that isn't Second Dynasty. This wasn't Second Dynasty, isn't supported. When I did the Philip by Games Art, his also needed supports. And some people, you know, just assume you'll support yourself for FDM and just put the standard stuff on, and they probably give you the settings for supports. And some people will do support free. I've always gone support free because I think it's a selling point for a lot of people. But, you know, sometimes some things are quite hard to print support free. So then you have to change the way you actually model something just so you can print it support free. And things like the Droids don't have a lot of bandwidth for doing that. But the Trailblazer is interesting because it isn't actually clipped. It glues together. And he has printing sticking out of the end, sort of printing in this angle. So the bottom, a cube like that sticks out and goes into a cube-shaped hole. So each of those will be at 45 degrees, which most printers can manage 45 degrees without throwing an absolute wobbly. And certainly my Bamboo has. And I printed them in matte filament, so hopefully it will just all slide together. And I had a real problem, and I've had a lot of problems recently since I went to 0.08, and I went to 0.1 on the other printers, and suddenly they're not able to bridge. When you're doing 0.08 or 0.1 layer lines, they can't bridge an open lock clip width anymore. They just start, it just doesn't get all the way across. And then what happens is you get this kind of curling back, and then the next bit curls back. And suddenly you have this curled up mass of filament in your clip hole instead of a nice neat top, and then the top's all bitty and eaten away. It's a nightmare. But on my, and that's on all the printers. Bamboo did it on something I printed recently as well. And I need to look at some of the settings, like I think putting it at 40, it was trying to do concentric prints in there, which didn't help. But, you know, I need to look at some of the bridging, and some of it isn't actually bridging, it's solid infill, which is another thing I had to realise. So on the Trailblazer, it had a really slight domed part, not that much, and it had another slight angle on the top of a part, and it just bubbled like mad, really badly pillowed. So pillowing is when it just, again, it doesn't get all the way across the infill, and it kind of leaves a gap, and then it bubbles up. It's like it hasn't cooled enough or before the next part goes over. So what I did eventually, after 3 or 4 experiments, was just slow the solid infill speed down from 350 millimeters a second to 50. And it's fixed it enough that the only real problems on that piece now are actually the layer lines at the top, because it's a slope in 2 directions, so you can see quite a long layer line. So I'm going to practice, because I actually don't want to paint the Trailblazer. I want to see if the matte grey will just weather, because it's matte, and whether I can just go straight to the weathering coat and not paint it. So I want to see, you see, whether I can do not painted stuff for a while and just see how it goes. Norm says, looks very terracotta, I like that colour. Yeah, red oxide is a brilliant primer colour, great for bricks as well. Ed says, support should always be set up for the printer, filament, resin and conditions of the room. Pre-supports are helpful sometimes, but never give the best results. I always buy pre-supported and use pre-supported resin files. I would never support my own resin if I can get a pre-support. And I've got all my stuff professionally pre-supported because people don't want to support their own. For FDM, I design support free, and I understand every filament is different, and some of them need different gaps and different temperatures and all that kind of stuff. So I can understand with FDM that being more important, but for resin, I've always found pre-supports are great on 90% of people, and the ones where they're not, because I printed it on my big printer and it needs some extra heavies on there, so I have to go in and add a few extra heavies, which is obviously hard to do because then it can't fit. But yeah, Haygear's auto supports in Blueprint Studio for the reflex printers is pretty good. Haygear's, is that FDM? It is, isn't it? I tried to get Orca Slicer to work, and I want it for bamboos, and it knows I want it for bamboos because I've selected bamboo printers in the options. First of all, you end up on orcaslicer.net, which is a bogus site. So then you have to go to GitHub, so once you've gone there and got it, it then wants a verification code, and I couldn't get, because Orca Slicer was apparently better on these slopes. So I tried it and I couldn't get the verification code on the Bamboo Labs to ever send anything. So I can't log on my Bamboo printers on it. And I know other people use it, so it's obviously just me or something. In the end, I just gave up and went back to the Bamboo Slicer and tried a different technique to finish off the slopey problem, which was pillows, rather than changing slicer. So I'm having just got Bamboo Slicer. It reminds me a lot of Process Slicer, so it's been quite easy to go to. The thing I'm loving, which is where I'm going with this Shergel, is its project ability. And I wish more slicers had projects. So what do I mean by projects? So on my Bamboo Slicer, I can have multiple plates there, and I can range my project. So I can print the whole of the Trailblazer BO folder, and I can put it out and auto support it, and it will put it onto 9 plates. And then I just print plate 1, print plate 2, print plate 3, print plate 4. I've got 2 printers, so actually I can print 2 plates at a time. And I've named my printers Ben and Maul. Yep, that's me, Ben and Maul. Maul obviously monologues sarkily all the time because, you know, that's Maul for you. And Ben sarks back. But anyway, they get on, they're sat next to each other, they're quite happy. But it was fine when I only had one, they didn't need names. And the others are called Prusser and Plus. But when I had 2, and one was 76 and one was 133, but 133 was on the left, my head couldn't cope. So I've renamed them to Ben and Maul. And my next one, just to annoy everybody who's not a fan, is going to be called Jar Jar. It is. Just to annoy everyone, I'm going to call it Jar Jar. I want to do some nameplates with a little picture of Ben or Maul and my logo and the name to go on them. So that's next. So Shergel said that Haygear's is resin. Auto supports are great on a lot of them, but what I found was with Chitterbox, which I'm using because that's what the people who pre-support for me use, is that you have to tweak your settings, so their light isn't actually what my guy uses. I've got a snapshot of what he uses, and he uses slightly different settings. But I find that if people who print all the time will, and you know, pre-support all the time, actually he starts with auto supports and then improves them, and there is an improvement on them for Chitterbox. Obviously, Lychee has a different algorithm. Haygear's Blueprint one will have a different algorithm. People keep telling me Lychee's better. I do like Lychee better than Chitterbox, if I'm honest, for the interface. But Lychee used to lose my printers every month. And I got so fed up of it always losing all my settings. And Lychee will not print my 2 main sort of people I print. So Hokusa, who isn't doing anything more, supports in Jitterbox, and Darkfire Designs support in Jitterbox. If you try and print their files on a Lychee slicer, they go berserk and print in rubbish every now and then. And the trouble is they do it on the big flat-sided prints. So I had a DFD lat that's this big a print on my massive printer. We're talking a chunky amount of money in that, and it printed supports through it. It looks fine in the slice, but no, it prints supports through it. It merged the supports, it missed things, it printed jagged holes through it, like there was big shattering through it. Oh, it was a nightmare. So if you are printing any of theirs, you have to use Jitterbox. So I've had to reinstall Jitterbox just to print those. And then the guy supports in it, and he supports for me as well. So I was just like, yeah. So I tend to use Jitterbox at the moment. Not saying it's the best. It doesn't have mirror like Lychee. So I do like the mirror option in Lychee. But I'm getting there. I finally worked out how to adjust it, and then forgot and had to work out how to adjust it again. Supports when you put them in, but you can do a lot on the free one. You know, it's good. But when it comes to FDM slicers, Bamboo has been much like Presser Slicer, but for the projects I found that really good. And obviously I can pick, because it's in Seamless, I send it from the slicer to the Bamboos, and then go and check them on there's a time lapse, so I now get a time lapse of everything, which is great for the YouTube videos, and I can put up that time lapse, it comes through on the internet, and I can look at them and see what they're doing when I'm not in the house. So if my phone wasn't in use actually videoing us now, I'd be able to show you their app, which loads of printers have this now. And I've always said I don't need it. I always like to walk in there and check that everything's off the build plate, everything before I put something to go. So sometimes I check on the screen, normally I just walk. But I've become really appreciative of that whole thing. So much so, I was looking at the Elegoo Saturn 4 thinking, oh, it'd be really useful to have a time lapse on a printer. And mine is really gunked up inside because I spilt the resin through it. So I can't turn it on off on the switch because the switch is gunked and won't turn on and off. So I actually have to physically plug and unplug it to get it to work. But, you know, it's fine. You know, at the end of the day, I don't need another resin printer. So I saved myself the money and spent it instead on Junk Room City, which I might talk about while I'm doing this. So this is the heel grinder, which is better than the mouse because it's slower. And it's also a nice square. You can get that edge in really nicely. It's smaller. The mouse is too big for a lot of this. It'd be great for the B1 Battle Droid legs, and I might use it for that. But this actually, really cool, does a really good job if I'm honest. And it comes with a whole pack of very tough actually. I've wet sanded and they didn't come apart. I'm on about my third or fourth one. It doesn't go that fast, so it doesn't melt the plastic. So Tamsin, you can sand really easily, but this is a slightly rough surface. When you look at that, it isn't sanding, it's smooth. And if I go with an emery board and sand it all in the same direction, it does get better. I can get it a bit smoother, but it's got a lot of roughness to it, which is why you know, something like spray putty over the top will help smooth that out. But my problem is the tolerances on these are really tight, really tight. And this is something I actually need to talk about. I struggled with the tolerances. So I said I printed this on my Neptune 4 Plus. I've got it flow rated, so it's extruding everything correctly, but I am not sure what it's doing dimensionally because every single one of my holes was over tight. Like on the presser were bang on, the Neptune Plus, everything was over tight. You're supposed to be able to shove a dowel up the legs of the B1 Battle Droids and up the middle. I did get the dowel up the middle, but on the legs, thankfully I've printed the posable ones that actually you don't really need to put them in. I mean, it could do with the legs, but they're not designed to have a pole up the middle in the same way. But there is a hole for a pole, and I literally cannot get it up there. And we are talking millimetres off. So you look, if I'd printed this on, say, my Bamboo, it probably would have just slid straight in there. what was most frustrating is I actually spent 3 or 4 days just sorting out the fact my print tolerances didn't work on this. And it wasn't something I would have realised till I came to assemble it. And it's just frustrating. Some of it is there is a slight ridge at the bottom. I ended up drilling out every single hole, including 2 or 3 I wasn't supposed to. Drilling out every single hole because they are for sort of M6s, occasionally an M8, or a barrel nuts which are 20 mil. So I ended up drilling everything out. Sorry, 10 mil. I ended up drilling everything out just to clear out the holes. But stuff like this, where this is friction fit, so 1 or 2 would just go in. It was fine. But then I got to the B1 Battle Droid and none of my dowels fit. And it was a 7-hour print to do the dowels. And I wanted it done because my friend's coming. So I just sanded the dowels. All went well until I put the glue on, went to put a part together and realised I hadn't done the dowels. And each dowel was taking me 20 minutes or so to sand. And I had all this epoxy 5-minute going on. So I sliced them really quickly, trying to cut them down, put them in, bang them in one side with a 1, 2, 3 block. I know you shouldn't use 1, 2, 3 blocks as hammers. I normally do because they're there and they're easy. I grab them and bang. I'm not a good DIYer. So anyway, I banged them in. I could not get the other side to bang home. I thumping it on the desk. I banged it. And 1, 2, 3 blocks are I was using them flat side on, so they're quite a spread out bash. I actually physically broke the part trying to bang it on to the dowels to get them done before the glue dried. I probably should have just scraped the glue off, but I was worried about the fit. I don't think it went down particularly. And on quite a lot of my parts, they never went in the last couple of mil. I've got mil gaps to fill on a lot of them because of that. But that you'll see on the B1, it was a nightmare. And of course, it wasn't one I was videoing because it was like 20 parts in by this point. So then I bashed all these parts to pieces. So I ended up putting epoxy filler on that and then spent hours sanding it, which is why when I came to the Pit Droid head that we watched earlier, that was after the B1 epoxy resin debacle where I got out the mouse sander to sand it down. And I was just like, this just is so hard to sand by comparison. I was looking for something that was easier to sand with the wood filler. And everyone said they're easier to sand, and they are sandable, and they are much softer to sand. So another reason for using them, these aren't going to get heavy usage. I'm not taking these droids out to shows and stuff like that. If I was going to give them a lot of battering around, I probably would use more epoxy for filling. But because these are going to be soft, I'm definitely doing the wood. And for Raverson, you made the comment about the parts would have been better separate and glued in. In this one, you can see here that on that arm that's just gone, that actually there is just a hollow and the part is separate. And I've kept it separate for finishing purposes, and I'll glue it in when I come to spray the sort of spray putty steps, probably, just to fill the gap. Ed says, I always come back to Chitu. It's not the best, but it always works, and I've gotten used to how to trick it into doing what I want to do. I think that's the thing. Sometimes, people go on to other ones and whatever, but Chitterbox is the default. My problem is, Elegoo will go, oh, you need to use Elegoo Chitterbox. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't work on a Mac. So I would just end up going back to normal Chitterbox. Timber says, for round bar, you should use an emery reel 1 inch wide. What's an emery wheel? And for round bar, you mean like going round the outside like that? I was on the wrist, I think that was. Yep. Ed says, are you sure that's over extrusion? It's not over extrusion because I've flow rate checked it. It's not over extruding. And not some issue in the file, possibly scaling or a mistake during design, just other ideas. I don't think it is, Ed, because when it's printed on the Prusa, everything fits fine. The dowels go in fine. Everything fits fine. When it's printed on the Neptune Plus, it doesn't go in. So, it's... And some of them are 2 halves of the same part, almost. So I think it is I don't get what it is. I don't know if it's just the Plus closes holes more. It's the closing of holes, I think, that's the problem on the Plus. So I don't know, does the Plus just... something in the way that slices close the hole slightly more? Anyway, Emery cloth that comes in a 1 inch wide reel. Okay, probably should. I just was using a mechanised way of doing things. So the mechanised way is to use the heel grinder. Have you used sanding mesh? I use it to clean copper pipe, plumber. No. I'm not sure I have, Jewel. I'm not even sure if I own any. Oh, I see. 3D printers don't agree, strikes again. I know. I mean, they do say you should print everything on the same printer, but if I printed everything on the Neptune Plus, then even more just wouldn't fit. So you can see here, the way this works is there's a cap nut, a bolt even, nut. There's a cap nut, and then there's a screw bolt that goes in. These are all M6, and they're all different lengths. I ended up changing some of his lengths. I don't know whether I was doing it weird or what, or whether I just didn't read the right line for the instruction, because I did get confused by some of the inner shoulder and the outer shoulder. But basically, there's the legs. We finally got progress because there's not a lot of sanding done on these, and most of the joints at this point become a bit easier. And then this is me desperately trying to work out how it all fits together. And then the hip joint goes on. There's a barrel nuts in some of these rather than the cap nuts. And again, this is me trying to sand out I've just filled that part and sanded that very part again, in the hope it will be a bit smoother. I suspect once I've painted it and spray puttied it, nothing will fit again, and I'll have to sort the tolerances again. It's going to be a nightmare. Manual way would be quicker and would keep it round. Timber, it doesn't matter if it's round, that part. It's an internal part going in. Quite a lot of his rounds, all my rounds actually printed off round because of the way 3D printers work at the top of a circle. And the ones that were supported, even those had rough unders. So none of my rounds are round. It's a real problem I need to sort out in the filling stage, because say those two parts there, they're probably not round. There's probably one side that's distorted, and I need to work out how I'm going to fix that. It may be copious amounts of filler, but it's just I was just trying to get the product down sort of small enough to fit into the hole. You know, it might be more round if it's manual. I don't need it to be round. It's going to be completely hidden. So yeah, I get that. For some of these parts, my big problem is, you know, that thin bit that's on the inside of each of those legs is not round. It's distorted where it was nearest the sort of heat bed at the bottom. It's distorted. It's either flat because it was on the heat bed, or it's flat because it was on a bit of sort of support, and then it just isn't, and it's very, very heavily stepped on the sort of layer lines. So they all need filling, and I don't know how I'm going to get them round, to be honest, because they're sort of hard. Some of them are easy to get round because they're going into a joint with two other pieces, and I can twist it round, the manky bit, round to the side that's nice and smooth on theirs, and then sand it manually, so I don't sand everything too much, but sand it back to round, so that it's sanding in line with those. I noticed that on some of the knees and elbows. But some of these parts here, just, I have no idea how I'm going to get them to look round. I've no idea if it's going to be much of a problem. So anyway, here we go. This is me trying to get it to fit. So yeah. Always compromises. Yes, it is, isn't it, Ravenson? Always compromises. In this part, I was just on a timetable to get it off the bed. And this is I want them all assembled, but actually I haven't assembled the B1 because I've got these nylock nuts on the hips, and nylock nuts don't seem to actually want to go onto the screw properly. There's like a nylon insert, isn't it? And I wasn't sure once you'd put them on, because obviously you have to almost damage them to get them on. They're really tight to get on. I wasn't sure if it was a one-way trip, that when I'd put them on, if I put them on a second time, they wouldn't work as well. So I haven't tightened any of my nylock nuts, and they're in two locations, the shoulders on the B1 and the hips on the B1. Not quite sure these are just normal barrels and nuts. And there's some nylocks. So if someone could explain to me whether nylocks are a one-way, once you've used them, they don't really work as well, or what. But anyway, it's a giant threaded rod, and I think I actually have to cut the threaded rod down as well. So I haven't done that yet. I will read it properly and do it. So his legs are there, and they're kind of loosely attached at the top. But this little guy, because he's smaller, I was able to get, and he hasn't got any threaded rod that needs cutting down or anything. I could actually get him on and get him together. But you can see there's an awful lot of fiddling and trying to work out how everything works all the time on these nuts to just get everything fretted. I hadn't bought the bamboo at the time that I did these. I literally only just bought it. But I've got to say, I'm really, really looking forward to having a printer that's more accurate, because Core XY is just a little bit more accurate than the bed shifters. Timber says they could be used again, but will not grip as well a second time, but will still be anti-vibration and work. Okay, that's cool. I've left them loose for now, but it means my B1 isn't together, which I want to get it done before Christmas. There's a lot of sanding, but you know, the B1 is mostly flatter, so it should be easier to, you know, put it on and sand it, which is a plus point. There's fewer details that would be problematic. So yeah. So here we go. This is the legs of the pit droid. Whilst this is going, which Christmas? Well, they're already one. They're not quite one, but I think obviously the first video that I did for the folded pit droid was February, which probably meant that I'd got them printed in the month or two before that. But it would have been before I started my test prints for Severna Spaceport this year. Someone's actually doing this. Odd Viking is doing this particular model on Instagram at the moment, and he's getting it all. He's got masking tape and he's put all sorts of markings, and I'm just like, oh, mine are just going to get a base coat all the same colour. So the B1 Battle Droid is definitely going to be Sahara Beige, I think it is, by Montana, because that is actually the colour they used in the movie. So it is the canon colour. This guy would be brown, but I'm tempted to do him the same colour, the Sahara Beige, was it? The canon colour for the other ones, rather than the brown. And I've got to decide. I've got quite a lot of cans of the Montana. So, yeah, we'll decide. I think so. These might be beige, just because it'll match. This, again, is just a fitment problem. Fitment problem. And I by this point, had stopped showing as many, recording quite as much. Timber asks, is it cold in your house? You always have a scarf on. I don't wear it in the morning. I put it on at lunchtime to go out and then go for a walk, and then I just never take it off again. My heating's normally set at 18, so it's not the hottest house in the world, but that's deliberate. This is quite. I've got the computers in here. This is probably one of the warmest rooms, and then the kitchen's on a completely different circuit. My hottest room is my 3D print room, because it's normally got 2 or 3 printers going. So this is. This is cute. The fingers for this, I think, will be easier to fill. The folded pit droid is a pain, actually. It's got loads of little bits that are going to be very fiddly. And I'll be using metal files for a lot. I think of their sanding in a minute. Photo 72, hello from Sweden. Where can I buy the model? What a website. So this is the pit droid by Droid division on Etsy. So Etsy, and hello from Sweden. So SpongeBob's, I think, is what it's actually called. But anyway, it's the pit droid, and the B1 Battle Droid is also by him. He is one of the top people for designing droids. So if you were to ask for a recommendation for these sort of legged droids, it'd probably be him as one of the top recommendations. I think when you're getting onto the more barrel R2s, there are other people that do those. But he's got so many droids and they're really good. I struggle a bit with some of the instructions on the B1, but there's nothing that, and it isn't just me, because when I go on the Facebook group, the question's been asked quite a few times, but I think it's because the instructions and the prints, he's updated some of the prints and the instructions are the older ones. So this is the Pick Droid head, and it looks like this. It was all done as one print, but it looks like this with all these holes because it's also, you can make it animatronic if you want. And so a lot of it is done with these kind of inserts that push in to hold things, like clips almost, that are for when you do the animatronics. Now, I made an absolute snafu on this. I actually glued something in very wonky. It was fine. I picked it up and moved it, and I must have knocked it when I did that because it's the middle loop, and when I came back the next morning, it's not even flush. You know, it's just stuck up in the air. So there's actually a lot of extra sanding that I created myself because I didn't glue straight. And it looked fine when I checked it. I don't like the new Araldite things. I'm getting used to them, but I never use their mixer syringe because I never need that much, and it's just goodbye syringe when you use that. Though they're a very interesting pattern, and I might use those syringe heads in something else. But anyway, again, back to Araldite, 5-minute epoxy. It takes slightly longer. 1, 2, 3 block to knock the ones in, and then whacking them in, and then we're off to put these into the base. So what I've done is I've glued the dowels in, and then I'm going to glue it into the base in a minute. I wish I had realised how some of the things went. I didn't fill these before I put them on, and I'm kind of wishing maybe I'd been sensible enough to do that and to get them to a certain stage, because the underneath of some of these barrels, the layer lines are really obvious, and they're going to be a bit of a pain to fill now they're on the underneath of the head. But you know, there we go. So yeah, Droid Division on Etsy, and they're great files. You know, he's got them for smaller printers, he's got them for bigger printers. So it really is down to, you know, there's stuff there for everywhere. I think he's now moved to being a bamboo shop, so a lot of it is cut for smaller but tested on a bamboo. And then he does design, like the Huyang is his, I think, but he did it for a charity. And the Facebook group has a lot on it. There's a Discord. I'm also on his Discord. And I went, you know, I don't understand the B1 Battle Droid. What do I put this to this on? And discovered it put everything back a day, which was panicking me by that point. Discovered that I hadn't actually printed any of the right size dowels for any of the connectors. And then the presser printed those dowels really deformed, which is why I was struggling. I was talking about it earlier. So I'm going to mention, what are we on? 10 o'clock. It is 10 o'clock. We haven't got to the B1 Battle Droid. Blimey. How long is this? Did I start late or something? It says it's been going an hour. We started at 8 and it's now saying 10 o'clock. Have we really been here 2 hours? This seems to be taking a long time. I thought this was an hour and a half video. We started at 8 and it's now 10 o'clock. Where did the other hour go? Wow. Anyway, I'm going to pause this and we can have the rest. Gosh, I was thinking it seemed slow. We were still doing it. I was expecting it to be over by now. I didn't even talk about Jungle Room City, but all the stuff for that arrives tomorrow. So the B1 Battle Droid, if there's no Junk Room City, it's exactly the same as all the rest of them, just bigger. And I will be doing a proper YouTube video on that. I'm just wondering, where did the extra hour go? Because that was only a 55-minute. I only spoke for half an hour at the beginning. I did start at 8 and it's now 10. Oh, wow. You see, I said time's flying by, but I didn't realise it was this much. So anyway, no wonder my throat's beginning to feel like it's spoken for a long time. So I doubt I'll show you the B1 as a full thing because I know, it says I only started the video 15 minutes in and it's been going an hour. I started at 20 past 8. It should be 20 past 9. And anyway, it said it's only been going 55 minutes. Wouldn't that make it 25 past 9? Anyway, whatever it was, folks, the B1's exactly the same. It's no different. I've explained the problem I had. So now there's an awful lot, and the next one hopefully will be, I know, don't ask me to count, I'm rubbish. I get my calculator out for 1 and 1. So the next one will probably be painting, because I did feel it's quite samey by the time you've seen 3 droids have the same time. But anyway, and so we're past our time. I never talked about Junk Room City, but that'll be an update when I actually have the, I don't know what I did to it. It should have been on full speed. It really should have been on full speed. Anyway, it was sped up to an hour and a half, or it actually looked like it would be an hour 40. So I thought, well, I've started, it will finish anyway. Whatever. I've gone over and you all want to get away and get to your beds, or for Norm, the rest of his Sunday. I don't know what I was doing. Who knows? Anyway, it did seem to take a long time to get through the pit droids. I was surprised we were still there. Anyway, you won't notice anything different from the B1 except it's bigger. And because it's all so big, actually there's no complete assembly of it because it's all in the distance. What you did miss, sadly, was the pit droid going together. But not to worry, because he's still got to be painted. So I get the feeling you'll probably see him assembled a few times on this. Anyway, gosh, doesn't time fly when you're having fun? And isn't it amazing I can talk for 2 hours without taking a breath? So, folks, thank you for coming. I really appreciate you. If you've got any questions, next time hopefully it'll be more painting rather than this. But, you know, guys, thanks for the support. See you next time, and have a great modelling month. Take care. And it's this up here.